Welcome to our cinematic journey. Don't forget to subscribe and enjoy the magic of movies with us. Let's roll. The movie opening credit sequence rolls over archive footage of nuclear tests in the 1950s. Credit information is redacted with strips of white tape overcut this footage. Nuclear bombs are going off, military personnel slipping on protective eyewear, ominous Godzilla spines briefly emerge from beneath the waves. They are trying to kill Godzilla. It doesn't work and he screams his disapproval. Cut to 1999 when a Monarch helicopter glides over a huge excavation in the Philippines. It looks like a mine. Thousands of workers labor in the massive trenches. As the copter lands, a Japanese researcher Seirazao and his British assistant Vivian Graham emerge. An American supervisor informs them that they had readings that suggested a uranium find. They loaded heavy equipment onto the site, only for it to collapse into an underground cavern. They head there to find the skeletonized carcass of a giant creature. It fills the cave as far as the eye can see. Hanging from the cave ceiling appears to be a cocoon of some type, as well as one that looks like it has hatched. What could it be? Going further into the cave, it looks as though some enormous thing has crawled from the cave and torn a wound across the landscape as it headed toward the sea. Cut to Japan. Later on, Joe Brody is on the phone frantically concerned about seismic activity. He thinks the nuclear power plant he works for should be shut down as a precaution. His somewhat shy son has made a sign for him. It's his birthday. His wife, Sandy, hustles the son off to school. She reminds Brody that it's his birthday and his son, Ford, had prepared a surprise. They head off to the plant and he tells the wife to head down into the reactor zone to make sure nothing has been damaged in the shaking. Once at the plant, Brody makes his case. His superiors think the activity is just aftershocks from the recent Philippines earthquakes. Brody says no. Suddenly, a major tremor hits the plant. We need to shut down now. Before the process can even begin, another shaker rocks the plant, triggering red lights all over the place. The reactor has been breached and Brody's wife is down there. Brody races downstairs, demanding that the protective shield door be kept on manual override so he can save his wife. Binoche and her team run full tilt trying to stay ahead of the cloud that will doom them. They are making good time until a teammate stumbles and Binoche stops to assist him. OMG, the cloud is right behind them. Meanwhile, Brody has arrived at the door and confirmed that he has control. Upstairs is freaking out. He gets a walkie-talkie message that Binoche is done for. Brody is overcome with emotion, literally shaking at the prospect of losing her. She tells him that he needs to shut the door to save the city. He waits until the last possible moment, then seals the door and their fates. But there's one more cruel twist of the knife. Literally seconds after the door has been sealed, Binoche appears with several of her team. Brody weeps as he watches his wife being bathed in the toxic radioactive mist. At his school, little Ford observes the plant's cooling towers collapse. His parents work there. All his classmates flee outside while watches his entire life collapse into ruin. Cut to current day. Taylor Johnson plays the adult Navy Ford Brody, Brody's estranged son. He's returning home after 14 months to his wife Elle and their kid. There's a sweet welcome home scene and Ford prepares for some long overdue mommy-daddy time when the phone rings. Joe Brody has been arrested in Japan for trespassing and is being held at the consulate. Ford has to go get him. Looks like daddy has to break a promise to his son to be there in the morning. In Japan, Ford is obviously a little disgusted at having to bail out his dad. Joe suffered a nervous breakdown after the accident and their relationship is clearly strained. Joe's apartment looks like a conspiracy theorist's paradise. Pictures and articles paper the walls. Stacks of books and research are everywhere. Clearly dad has gone round the bend. He's mumbling about echolocation and earthquakes talking to each other. Out of pity, Ford suggests that his dad come home with him. Joe hasn't seen his grandson in years. He needs a break. Joe, however, is adamant. He needs to know what happened that day. His wife is still buried in the rubble of the quarantine zone. If he could just get back to his house to retrieve his research. He doesn't even have a picture of Sandy to cherish. Begrudgingly, Ford decides to help his dad. They head back to the old neighborhood, which looks abandoned and overrun. A bit like I Am Legend. Suddenly, a pack of dogs gambols through the scene. How could that happen in a radioactive wasteland? Joe checks his Geiger counter, which shows no radiation at all. He snatches off his protective headgear and breathes deeply. It's completely safe. Now Ford is becoming convinced. Something is amiss here. They rummage through the house and Joe grabs his zip disks. He finds a picture of Sandy and turns to see Ford's birthday sign, still strung up after all these years. Meanwhile, Ford finds an old army toy that he pockets. The beating of helicopter blades shakes them from their reverie. Again, why fly over a quarantine zone? As they head outside, they're immediately scooped up and driven to the abandoned nuclear plant. Serizawa and Graham are talking with some others. They are concerned about activities surrounding an odd cone-shaped organic structure protruding from the surface of the old reactor. Someone interrupts them to say they need to come with him. They are taken to where Joe is being interrogated. He comes across as manic and a little loopy, but Graham confirms that his data is strikingly similar to what they're seeing now. He's the only one left who knows what happened 15 years ago. Back in the main room, the readings confirm that EMP pulses are knocking out their electronics with alarming frequency, just like in 1999. Serizawa concedes that it's time to kill the program. A steel containment net is lowered and millions of watts of electricity are applied to the chrysalis, except that it doesn't work at all. Suddenly, a massive multi-legged creature cracks out of the shell and pounds its clawed leg on the ground, creating an EMP pulse that depowers the facility. People screaming and running as the creature strains against its enclosure. Meanwhile, Joe is still handcuffed in a security vehicle. He watches helplessly as people are slaughtered around him. Suddenly, a support smashes his vehicle and he's free. Joe watches in horror from an elevated walkway as his son faces death. But his own safety is in jeopardy as his bridge is demolished and he tumbles in a horrible fall. The creature has escaped and lumbered off into the night. The next day, Captain Russell Hampton informs Serizawa that the military is taking over. Who does Serizawa need on his team? He points to Joe, bandaged and on a stretcher. They take Joe and Ford in a military transport. Unfortunately, Joe doesn't survive for long. Now all eyes are on Ford. What could he possibly remember from his conversations with his dad? Ford is ashamed to admit that he thought his dad was nuts. Serizawa clues into this discovery and brings Ford into a briefing room and explains to Ford that the recently hatched Muto may be trying to communicate with another giant monster that was found roaming the Pacific a long time ago. Serizawa then loads up the same vintage nuclear test footage from 1954 that we see in the opening credits, but a few crucial details included, mainly a few frames of a familiar giant spiny creature. Serizawa explains that the nuclear tests weren't tests, they were attempts to kill this creature. This creature has been named Godzilla, and Serizawa is convinced he is returning, a feeling that is soon confirmed when he's spotted soon thereafter. L is freaked out about the news coverage of the Japan damage and can't reach Ford. Since Ford doesn't have much to offer, it looks like he's headed to Hawaii for a flight back home. The Navy confirms that the Muto massive unidentified terrestrial organism is headed across the Pacific. Could it be headed for a Hawaii rest stop? The fleet heads in that direction, flanking Godzilla's spines, which is heading in that same direction. Serizawa posits that Godzilla is tracking the Muto and wants to fight it to restore balance to nature. Ford is at the airport, waiting on the train to his terminal. He's playing with the toy Solitaire and a little boy becomes fascinated by it. As the boy wanders onto the train, the doors close. His parents aren't on it with him. They freak out, but Ford mouths that he will bring the kid back. He hopes that he won't miss his flight. Back to the carrier ship, they've heard that the Russians are missing a nuclear sub.